ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This week we continue our Hollywood Spooktacular series of what's the word I'm looking for? Revisiting some of our favorite horror movies from yesteryear with James Whale's 1931 classic Frankenstein.
Hey, but before we begin, join James and I on this film journey together. Just go ahead and hit that subscribe button on your screen, and right next to it, ding the bell so you never, ever miss a video. And just as a reminder, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers, but if you really need a spoiler warning for a 1931 movie, James, really? Probably not.
There's only so much, that we can do for you. So yes, 1931's Frankenstein, arguably the granddaddy of all sort of classic horror movies, spawned numerous sequels, remakes, imitations, and what have you, obviously based on Mary Shelley's seminal, groundbreaking work, heralded as the first science fiction movie ever made, the first science fiction novel ever written, and the first sort of one of the first horror novels, all kinds of firsts. And I think one of the things you have to sort of acknowledge right off the bat, and quite strangely so, is what a terrible adaptation of the book it is.
Yes.
It is literally like, let's just tear out the spine, cut off the head, repurpose the limbs, and we'll make a fun, goofy monster movie from whatever disassembled, reassembled bits that we feel like. It's nothing like the book, and it always amazes me how sort of warmly the film was received back in 1931 despite that.
Well, I think it has a measure of taboo to it. I mean, right at the beginning, when you have the narrator coming out and prepping the audience, we are going to go into a place where only God goes, and and for a 1931 audience, this was extremely daring. This was extremely borderline blasphemous. And so you can see why it has maintained this classic stature, albeit for the reasons that you mentioned, and I'll add to in just a moment. I'm of mixed feelings about this film, if I'm really honest.
Okay. No, you can't leave me hanging like that.
Yes. Well, a guy my age, I grew up on these films. I saw Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and the Monster. It was the same Boris Karloff character. And for me, that was Frankenstein. And then about 16, 18 years ago, after I finished grad school, I was working as a community relations for Barnes & Noble. And I used to have to do bulk purchases for schools, for local high schools and their English departments. So I'd be sending off 200, 300 copies of different books. And one of the most popular books that was being read was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And I remember thinking, really, why is that so popular? And somebody, it's an amazing book. And I'm thinking the movie, and I was like, okay. Anyhow, fast forward, I read the book and I'm like, this is nothing like that movie. They took a deeply philosophical book about the nature of creator and creation and the dialogues between them, and they turned it into a monster movie. And I felt like I'd been betrayed all these years.
Yeah, well, I think that is fair. I mean, the book is an absolute masterpiece. And like you said, yes, it's about the nature of creation, about the moral questions of becoming a creator, of breaking the rules of nature and the rules of God, if you like, and trying to replace God, and become. There's a moment in the film, actually, where he goes like, now I have created, now I have become God. I don't need God anymore. Essentially, and that's sort of the truly sort of horrifying aspect of the book. But yeah, the book approaches the subject with such a degree of a sort of intelligence and insight and care. The creature isn't a hulking, lumbering zombie, but is a deeply sort of pained and damaged philosophical character, very thoughtful creature,
very introspective. Who
isn't a monster, but is just a reanimated person or assembly of people, and behaves like that, and grows to have this sort of resentment for his creator. The film, on the other hand, is a completely different beast altogether, where it is a monster movie. It is about a guy who, just for his own personal obsessive reasons, decides that to play God, decides to, you know, that he will become famous and he will get the glory by reanimating dead bodies. Everything to do with, you know, the good brain and the bad brain in the jars, and all of that is completely different. He has a sidekick who isn't called Igor. Later on, I guess Igor comes into it, but he's called Fritz, who again obviously is not in the book, and he is. They're essentially kind of a sort of Burke and Hare duo of grave robbers.
Yes,
you know, their chances. They're much older, I think, than Frankenstein was in the book, where he was a student doing these things. You know, Colin Clive seems much older than that.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're literally robbing graves to build this creature so that he can become all powerful. And it backfires, and the guy goes on a rampage. And that's essentially all there is to it, really.
Yeah. Just as a side note, Colin Clive was only 37 when he died, so he couldn't have been that old. But I get your meaning in that he definitely was not a medical student. A couple points I want to make. One, after I read Frankenstein, I thought, what other classic, you know, of these classic monsters have I been led to believe they are one way, and yet the literature that they are drawn from is a completely deeper, you know, manifestation. And sure enough, I knew Bram Stoker's Dracula was a much better rendition of the source material, but I went on to read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which, like Frankenstein, is it's a whole discussion on human nature and the aspects of good and evil and the decisions that we make that lend ourselves to the consequences or benefits we have in our life. And it has almost nothing to do with the caricature monster I'd come to associate it with for decades.
It's funny, I actually read that one quite recently as well, but I'm not familiar with any of those sort of classic movie versions of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Not really.
Right.
The Frederick March or the Spencer Tracy one, or even the later ones. So I'm not quite sure how they fare. But yeah, the book is incredibly interesting, as is The Invisible Man, which I think still stands as one of the great universal horror movies, which I think is James Whale as well, who directed it.
That I'm not sure about.
I may have just...
While you're pausing there, let me just say there is a really good updated version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that James Nesbitt starred in about 10, 12, 15 years ago. And I think it was a miniseries, 2, 3, or 4 episodes, something like that. That I only watched once, but I remember liking much more and thinking they at least captured the spirit of the book, even though they took some liberties.
I mean, more recently, it's The Incredible Hulk is basically Jekyll and Hyde, isn't it? You know, it's a scientist experimenting with his own body, and you know, through those experiments, he turns into like an uncontrollable rage monster. Invisible Man 1933 is James Whale.
Okay,
so is the same director as Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, and I would go out on a limb and say that actually I think the James Whale Universal monster movies are the best ones. I find Dracula a little bit slow and boring, if I'm completely honest. The Mummy, which is directed by Carl Freund, who up until that point had been a cinematographer, isn't bad, but it's essentially just Dracula again. Albeit, you know, a very slightly different, exotic, you know, ancient, ancient sort of priest figure, not priest figure, but sort of a romantic lead, if you like.
I found myself when I was watching this film, though, again, because it's been quite a while since I've watched it, that I was kind of irritated with the caricature nature of Dr. Frankenstein and Fritz, aka Igor. And then realized, as I was kind of processing that, these aren't caricatures. These are the original fount of which those characters actually come from. But I found the mad scientist aspect to him in a modern sensibility. It just didn't measure up for me. It was very over the top. It didn't make sense. The whole, like even you said, the normal brain and the abnormal brain. It was very much almost like you would go into a Halloween haunted house, you know, during the holiday season, and they'll give you these caricatures that we've come to know and identify. But is that really something in a classic film that I'm looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of the book is about his journey and the path he chooses and the bad decisions that he makes along the way. Whereas the films drops you right in on the eve of his creation. Essentially, you know, there's no backstory, there's no lead into it really, and it does become almost like a haunted house kind of story, just in his, you know, castle slash lab, you know, almost immediately, and it's just all about the events of the night where he succeeds at creating the creature, and then the immediate aftermath thereof, where it, you know, that it kind of escapes and causes trouble, which leads to the downfall. And it's so stripped down, it's so stripped bare. It's quite, in some ways, I understand it's quite a sort of let down to those who are sort of familiar with the story, because you're like, oh, is this it? Is this all you're going to broach in this movie? But I think the reason why it has sort of stood the test of time so well are just in the personifications of those characters, and obviously not least is Boris Karloff as the monster. Apparently, Colin Clive was really not happy and was really pissed off when the movie came out, because, you know, you sign up to play Frankenstein in Frankenstein, and you're like, okay, this is going to be sweet. This is going to be the role for which I am remembered. And not only is the only thing anybody talks about Boris Karloff's creature, but they also start calling the creature Frankenstein. And for years and years and years, arguably even to this day, when people say Frankenstein, they do mean the monster. Like, people kind of know now that they're wrong, but they don't care, and they're going to say it anyway.
Right.
So when Colin Clive was not happy, he was really cheesed off that he had been completely eclipsed by Karloff, to this point where the character had stolen his character's name, albeit sort of inadvertently.
Oh, I'm guilty of it. I mean, I called that month. I remember having the Halloween mask when I was, 8 years old. Hey, I'm Frankenstein. You never said I'm Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah, it's not quite so catchy.
Yeah, but bringing it back to the film, that was one of the aspects of the movie that's difficult to relate to, because apparently there's this love interest and there's this wedding about to happen, and yet the Frankenstein character gives no indication that he would be anything desirable, anything of a husband. Like, you're wondering, why is this marriage taking place? This guy is not wrestling with, how do I balance a passion for my work and a passion for my wife? This guy gives almost no thought whatsoever to anything except his work. And he really just comes across as a caricature, not someone who's very nuanced, who's very trying to wrestle with the big philosophical questions and scientific questions he's actually engaged with. He is mad. And so him being mad in the context of this film, for me, just was less than fulfilling.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't even really have an arc. He's introduced at the beginning as crazy, and he just remains consistently crazy.
Even during his wedding, he's crazy.
He succeeds at in his plot, if you like, only for it to then backfire on him. But there is no evolution or arc for the character whatsoever.
No.
But then I think that the film sort of sets him up to fail almost, because it strips all of that away. It even changes his name. He's not Victor Frankenstein anymore. He's Henry Frankenstein. And actually the other guy is now called Victor Moritz, which is another just sort of composite name of different characters from the book. And, his bride-to-be in the novel was actually his kind of adopted sister, his stepsister, if you like, his adopted sister. And so all of these sort of complexities of the family are no longer there. The relationship with the father is almost non-existent. I mean, there's barely a moment. I mean, you see the father, and the father is like this doddery old fool who's in a few scenes, including a very bizarre final scene that kind of completely takes the wind out of the sails of the denouement, and is seemingly played for laughs as well. There are almost no direct interactions between father and son.
No,
he seems to be solely interacting with other characters who then run off and talk to Frankenstein and then come back to him. And so that entire relationship is sort of ignored or extracted out of it. So all of his sequences really are with Fritz, his helper, and the creature itself, and consist of just sort of disaster management, right? Rather than anything particularly sort of profound or introspective. And then the best sequences are the sequences when the monster escapes at the end. And he has the misunderstanding with the little girl and ends up throwing her in the lake. And then the finale at the windmill, and before you know it, you're like, oh, okay, well, I guess this is it then.
Yeah. And fortunately, it's only an hour and 10 minutes long. We often complain about the bloated films we watch. This is definitely pared down. And yet so much is lost in the story that could have been expounded upon. And you just kind of feel, I come back to my analysis of this, is it was very cutting edge and a little bit taboo for 1931. And so it's maintained this mystique and this classic status. But, when we do our Every Best Picture series, one of the questions we ask is, does it stand the test of time? And I know that there's going to be people and viewers out there, and we'd love to hear your comments in the comment below, but I would say that this film does not stand the test of time. It's not something I would rewatch. I'll probably end up watching it again in my lifetime, but it's not something I'm going to sit and go, oh, let's watch Frankenstein again today, because to me, there's very little meat on this bone.
Yeah, for me, I think what it sets up ultimately proves more rewarding actually in later films, and just in the almost 90 years to follow. Really,
sure.
Even the sequels, they made Bride of Frankenstein incredibly quickly afterwards, and it uses some elements that were used in the book that they didn't have space for because they were too busy doing nothing in the first movie, I guess. That are way better and way more interesting. And I think Bride of Frankenstein is a much better movie than Frankenstein, and even some of the sequels to come. Like, I think actually Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein are actually hugely entertaining. Sort of monster mashups where they started throwing all the characters in, and you get this kind of shared universe. But I think I really do feel that the only reason that the original Frankenstein is held up as fondly as it is today is because it's Frankenstein. And because just the cachet and the credibility of it being the film based on the novel, and with Boris Karloff being such an iconic character, people just sort of take it as read. It's in the DNA of Hollywood, of cinema. It's right up there with, we were talking about sort of Gone with the Wind and how that was so iconic and just came to stand and represent early Hollywood to the same degree as, let's say, Wizard of Oz or Casablanca. And I think arguably you could say Frankenstein, more so than any of the other Universal monster movies, that image of Boris Karloff, it just is just a milestone in the industry's history. And I think because of that, people, it just takes it lifts the whole film up with it, whether it should do or not.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. And what it spawned is greater than the launching pad that we're analyzing today. I think there's versions that have been subsequently that have been made that have mined and come closer to the original source material that are much more interesting to watch. I mean, even one of my personal favorites, and it's quite old now. I think it's 1971's Frankenstein: A True Story. It was a 2-part made-for-TV movie. Had an all-star cast. It had David McCullum, who was just coming off of Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Right.
It had Michael Sarrazin playing the monster, who was just coming off of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? It had Leonard Whittig playing Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, who was just coming off of Romeo and Juliet. It's got James Mason. It's got a very young Jane Seymour. It has this beautiful all-star cast. And they really delve into the relationship much more between Frankenstein and the creature, and the love-hate relationship that they develop for one another, that they can't come to destroy one another, but they can't come to just embrace one another either. And I think they do a wonderful job with the tension, albeit it's a 1971 TV movie. It's not perfect, but I rewatched it again probably within the last year, and it still has iconic scenes that I remember as a childhood that are truly bizarre. And this is a spoiler show, so I can say Jane Seymour becomes the bride of Frankenstein, and the creature literally pulls her head off.
Oh, nice.
At a dance ball. And James Mason plays the evil doctor who's out to stop everything. And on the ships going to the Arctic at the end of the film, the creature takes him up in a storm, hangs him by the yard arm until the electricity hits him enough time that it skelefies James Mason. So he's just a skeleton up there, and he's just screaming at first. And it has these, for a TV movie, it really did an indelible impression on a young Steve Hackman's film viewing. And again, rewatching it again, it mostly holds up.
I will have to dig that one out, because I don't think I've ever seen that, and that sounds absolutely great. But I think that is ultimately what Frankenstein has done, is that it's kind of created a whole subgenre unto itself. I mean, the word Frankenstein has become like a verb, where you can refer to something as being Frankensteined now, where it's just like lots of different parts that shouldn't go together, and you've put something together like that. And so any sort of zombie movie or story about just bringing anything back from the dead has the ghost of Frankenstein sort of looming large over it. And I think that is all for the better, and I think it's perfectly fine that it's all been sort of thrown in together. It's all been sort of, it's become this kind of sort of cottage industry, if you like. Obviously, Hammer had a great run of Frankenstein movies with Christopher Lee as the creature, and Peter Cushing, almost reprising their double act from the Dracula movies. But now Cushing is Frankenstein, and Christopher Lee is the creature, and they are of varying quality, but when you've got those two guys in it, it's pretty good. I mean, what you see interesting happening in the legacy Universal monster movies is different actors assume the mantle. It's not always Boris Karloff, and actually someone like Lon Chaney Jr. ended up playing, I think, every single one of the Universal monsters during his career. I think by sort of the late 40s, in some of those really late Frankenstein movies, he was playing the monster. I think he might even play Frankenstein in one of them.
And then he plays the werewolf, and he plays Invisible Man.
He's definitely the werewolf. He's definitely Dracula, I think, as well, and he's the mummy even, I think, in some of the I don't think he played. I'm not sure if he played
Invisible Man.
Man, because that was a character that didn't really reappear in later movies.
No, actually, when I said Invisible Man, what I meant to say was the mummy, and when you said mummy, that's what I meant to say. Actually,
But they did do a lot of kind of swapping around in those later movies, and unfortunately, it was a lot to do, it seemed, with Bela Lugosi just kind of falling out of favor somewhat, and so someone else always had to play Dracula, which must have especially stung when, and I think it's Son of Frankenstein, when you've actually got Bela Lugosi in there and he's playing like Igor or something, and you've got someone else playing Dracula. I think Lon Chaney might even play Dracula in that one, and it's or one of the Carradines, I think, plays it, and it's that's got to sting. Poor Bela Lugosi, he did really get the raw end of all of this. But
and viewers, if you want a little bird's eye view into Bela Lugosi, watch Ed Wood with Johnny Depp.
Oh, sure.
And Martin Landau playing Bela Lugosi. I believe Landau won an Oscar for that, for Best Supporting Actor.
He beat Samuel L. Jackson.
Yes,
to the Oscar that year.
Ed Wood was a fantastic movie, and you really get a really good understanding of the depths of which Bela Lugosi, the heights that he had reached, and the depths he ended up at.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, all of those. I mean, even Boris Karloff. I mean, he he was able to kind of sort of step in as Bela Lugosi was kind of on Bela Lugosi's coattails, if you like. I mean, that's a very oversimplification, but he managed to kind of come in and he really stole the thunder, and it was him that became like the go-to monster guy for so long. You know, like he did Frankenstein, and they did the Mummy, and then he ended up doing all of these other characters for the foreseeable future, you know, and all, like Fu Manchu and these Edgar Allan Poe adaptations and all this other kind of stuff. And for years and years and years, he was the guy. Whereas Lugosi his career really didn't go anywhere.
No,
and I think there was a number of reasons for it. I think, you know, he had some drug issues and money issues and other issues, and you know, there were things working against him as well. But it's a fascinating period of Hollywood history that is arguably more compelling than a lot of the movies that they ended up.
Yeah, no, very much so.
If I'm completely honest, I think one of the very best adaptations of Mary Shelley's novel that I have ever seen is a stage adaptation directed by Danny Boyle that starred Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller as Frankenstein and the creature, but they swapped. Yes. On alternate nights, they would swap characters. And I saw this in the cinema as part of one of these NFT live shows where they filmed the stage show and then they play it back to you in the cinema. And we went to see both versions because I couldn't decide which version I'd rather see. So I think almost like a week, not on consecutive nights, but I think a week apart, we went and saw both versions, and they were both brilliant. You know, they both brought incredibly sort of different ideas to the roles, and every other character in the piece was played by the same person every night. And I thought it was amazing, and the structure of it was great, because the book is really interestingly structured, where there's another character, there is a narrator, Captain Walton, who is recounting the whole story. And he tells this story about how he was, you know, traveling in the Arctic when his ship came upon this guy near death's door on the ice, who was Victor Frankenstein, who they hauled into his boat and they brought him back from the brink of death. And then they're like, what are you doing out here? And he's like, I have a story to tell you. And so then the bulk of the novel is told from Frankenstein's point of view, right up until about halfway through. Then it changes again, and you get the creature tell it, because it runs up to the point where the creature runs away, does all this stuff, and then they meet up again. And he's like, Frankenstein's like, I'm going to destroy you. And he's like, wait, let me tell you what I have just experienced. And so then the creature tells his story. Then it goes back to Frankenstein's story. Then it goes back to Walton's story. So it goes Walton, Frankenstein, creature in the middle. And what the play did, which I thought was really interesting, if I'm remembering it correctly, is it starts with the creature's story. It starts so it doesn't start at the beginning. It starts with the creature kind of, you know, escaping,
right,
and kind of going out into the unknown and interacting with the blind man and his family, you know, and doing these odd jobs for him. And then you slowly piece together in sort of flashbacks, I think, what has happened. And then it builds to this obviously great finale where they're sort of pursuing one another across the ice in the Arctic and what have you. And I just thought it was so imaginative. It was so well done. The performances were so compelling. And yet it felt true to Shelley's original vision in a way that certainly for all the things that this film is remembered for, it is not in any way faithful to the novel.
No, I've got nothing to add to that other than to say I've seen that play. I've seen it the same. There was a cinematic theater showing of National Theater here. And then if you remember when COVID hit, a lot of the theater companies, particularly in the UK, were making some of their best productions available as people are locked down. And so we watched it again, and I've seen them with both each playing the role, and they're both absolutely amazing. And you're right, there's probably no version of this story I've seen on screen that best captures the spirit of what Mary Shelley was trying to bring to life, of what would this really look like, and what would be the discussions between creator and creation. For viewers out there, if you haven't had a chance to see it, it's a wonderful, wonderful stage play. I would love to see it live.
Oh, that would be.
I've only seen it on the screen. So
yeah, that would be incredible. I imagine if you went to like the National Film Theatre website, they might still be offering it. You might be able to rent it from their website. I wonder if they're ever planning to release it on like Blu-ray or something, because that would be something. Although I think Bride of Frankenstein and the Invisible Man and maybe the Wolf Man are the best.
I need to rewatch. It's been years since I've seen them, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, because it was a younger Steve. That it would be interesting what a 56-year-old Steve would think of these.
The joys of collecting physical media. So I have
There you go. I think I spotted that when I was at your place the other day. Yeah.
See, so it has all of them, and each one, like the Frankenstein one. This is not one Frankenstein movie. This is including even the Abbott and
Costello. I love Abbott and Costello.
So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 official Frankenstein movies between 1931 and 1948.
Wow, they were cranking them out.
I think there's the whole list on the back there. So there's like 31 or something movies.
You'll see in my Fright Night edit that I found on YouTube clips from Sir Graves Ghastly, my Detroit area Saturday afternoon, and so I put a little clip in there of it, and it just brought back memories. And that's where I would have watched all of these types of films. It was he did 2, I think usually 2 every Saturday. And
wow,
yeah,
because a lot of these, when I sat down to watch this box set, which was only a couple of years, I hadn't seen most of them. You know, I mean, a lot of these, the sequels are just kind of rubbish that you really wouldn't have seen unless you're watching TV all the time. But other than I think the big 8, there were really not many that I had seen before at all, and so it was great to finally go through them all and tick them all off. But I do remember that I did watch the original Frankenstein at a very young and impressionable age.
Mm-hmm.
I think the memory of where I saw it, which house we were living in, I could have only been 7 or 8.
Okay.
And I had videoed it off the TV from the night before, and I think I just sat down on my own and watched it like one Sunday afternoon or something. And it really creeped me out. It really freaked me out. But I think that, it was just a case of I'd never seen anything like it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like 8 years old. And so I think the combination of it being in black and white and the performances being slightly different, to how stuff in the mid 80s would play, combined obviously with that makeup. But I remember the sequence where he picks the girl up and throws her in the river was terrifying.
Yeah,
absolutely terrifying. You watch it now and it's and it just kind of plays out, but back then it was absolutely terrifying. And so definitely did have an impact on me.
Those 1931 sensibilities, and even me watching in the 70s, you in the 80s, it was we viewed things differently back then. And
for sure.
I remember watching. I'm a big Lost in Space fan. I love the old 60s show. I remember years ago buying the whole series on DVD when DVD was still a really big thing. And I was telling Tim, you got to watch this. And the first episode, they're climbing outside on the tether, and they're in space. And it was so slow. It must have been like 10 minutes. And that a 1966 audience was going, oh my God, they're in space. This is amazing. And modern audiences just, come on, let's get this moving, So. Hey, well, that's going to wrap up our analysis and our Halloween Spooktacular review of 1931's Frankenstein by director James Whale. We've given some pretty strong opinions about this film. What are yours? Just let us know in the comment box below. Also, James and I are on social media, and you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. And all of those details and links are in the description box below. James?
That's right. Let us know, what are your favorite adaptations of Frankenstein? Which are your favorite Universal monsters? Which of those sequels do you like the best? And who's Frankenstein's monster do you like best? I mean, let's say Karloff is a given. Outside of Karloff, who brings it to the screen, and any other great adaptations that you know of, please do let us know.
Till next episode, have a happy Halloween.
Bye-bye.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.